Hello, and welcome to this video where we will now look into some of the non-interference information flow model. What we have seen in the previous session was about the information flow models that is dominantly looking after the confidentiality, and one of the models like Biba integrity model was looking at the integrity of the data. However, the non-interference model actually differs in design from the previous models in a sense that what it ensures is that any action that has been taken by a subject is segregated, or it's not known to the subjects at the lower level. What it actually means is that the model is not concerned with the data flow. It is not about whether you'll be able to access the data at a given level or a level above or a level below, but it is with respect to what the subject knows about the state of the system at given point of time. Now, any change by a higher level subject, for instance, will never be noticed by a lower level subject, and this is to maintain the non-interference between the two levels. So you can imagine that, for instance, in your organization, if your manager is hiring someone, it may or may not be required for you to know about that hiring. So if your manager, for instance, is inputting the data about the new hire, it should not be known to you what is being put, because you may end up interfering with that hiring process. That's the reason it is not about the data flow, but it is about what the subjects are doing at a given level. Now, there are important models and well-known models around this concept. One among them is called Brewer-Nash model, and it is also called as Chinese wall, or an information barrier, or an ethical wall, or a cone of silence model. Now, all these names are synonymous, so you will have to memorize that they mean one and the same thing. What it does is basically it is designed to provide controls that mitigate conflict of interest, be within an organization, but it could also expand to outside an organization. You can imagine, for instance, if you are working in an organization in which, let's say, one of your family members is also customer, uh, your information about certain things, your action on certain things may create a conflict of interest with respect to what your family member as a customer has to do with the organization. So that's why this segregation of duties, or a Chinese wall concept, is being built. It is also, for instance, applicable to cloud computing, where you will see that same platform serving two different tenants should have a proper Chinese wall in terms of the information and data flow. So an organization A on the same platform should not, or must not, be able to see what is organization B data and process flows are, though they are on the same platform. So that's why this concept is important, both in a business process and in a technical sense. So that is where this model stands. You also have other models like the Clark Wilson model that has been developed to provide integrity control checks. And what they do is basically implement integrity policy for computer system, which means the data manipulation by a given subject, if it occurs, has to occur through a defined process. And there are various attributes of this system which have a very dedicated name, like the constrained data item, the one whose integrity that you are preserving, integrity verification process, the actual process of how the CDIs are being changed. What is a transaction that is enforcing the integrity, the policy that you may have. So these are all the attributes that you should know the definition of, but in a very core terms, this model, what it entails is basically that an integrity must be preserved, and if the integrity is violated, it is violated through a proper procedure so that the audit trail remains. Take, for example, if you are changing an accounting ledger, then there are two ways of changing it. One, either doing through a reverse entry or by using an invisible ink to erase a previous entry and then write over it. You may very well argue already that which of these two methods is applicable in a business scenario or will be much more acceptable in a business scenario. So a reverse entry leads for a proper audit trail, while applying an invisible ink may not have a proper trail, and that's why it's not fit for business purposes. There are more examples. For example, the take grant protection model. This is very common in databases where you can, for example, apply or take a particular rule or role, and you can grant that role or rules further. You can also grant rules to create new rules, and you can also give rules to remove certain aspect or certain rules from the system. This is works, for instance, dominantly on a trust membership basis. For example, if I know my colleague who has joined my team requires the same level of access as I do, then I can directly grant my accesses to my colleague who can then do the same things on a system as I am able to do. Now, this has to be very carefully designed and, as you can imagine, very carefully maintained, because an irrational use of this grant privilege can also create havoc, because you may end up not knowing how many you have granted, who you have granted, and then it just becomes an unmanageable mess, so to say. Uh, this is also dominantly used to make the user identification process easy. However, as it has its own pros and cons, especially from the cons perspective, it has to be well managed and again well documented. Examples that you will see appear in the book or in the course title that you will read. You do not have to remember the name of each of these models. However, it is highly recommended that you at least know the basic concepts that works around each model. It may so happen that you will be asked a question not about a popular model, but one which is not so dominantly used or which is not very regularly used in applications that you may see, and therefore you may not memorize the functioning of it, thereby ending up not able to answer the question correctly during the exam. So uh, a bit of a memorization is required in this aspect, but that is something just to make sure that you first understand the concept before you memorize. All these models also help you to go and define access at much granular level. You can have an access control matrix where you can point the access between subject and object in form of a matrix as to which subject has access to which object, and then you maintain what kind of a permission that you want to have for subject over the object. Now, these things are well visualized, but it is very difficult to maintain in a complex system. You can imagine a big organization like a bank, which may have thousands of servers, having this granular level of access control metrics is a nightmare to maintain, and it's prone to so many errors. And this models also forms the basis for what we normally see in business implementation, like discretionary access control, mandatory access control, role-based, rule-based, and attribute-based access control. But the hidden feature and the concept behind all this basic access model which are implementable during application is what we have seen the information flow model in this session and in the previous session. So I'll stop here. Thanks for listening, and I'll hope to see you in the next session. Thank you very much.